employment, what the Fed is getting wrong, and then finally, at the end, how we're going to make money from it.
I was trying to wrestle with this conundrum that, all the indications I look at in the U.S. economy are telling me it's on fire. And we should also be very concerned about inflation, and that they're going to have to correct their mistake and raise rates significantly next year to offset their mistakes this year and last year.
All right, welcome to YWR. We have our favorite economist back again today, Marvin Barth. Marvin, you've been lighting it up, writing so many good things, and
thank you.
Yeah, we met back in August. We were talking about China-U.S. relations and how to hedge it, kind of hedging the unhedgeable, hedging the chaos, I think was the title of that call. And that whole conversation was sparked by a YWR reader who was familiar with you and your work and thought you would be a good fit and we would get along well, which has been exactly the case. And we found out that we both have a lot in common. That you lived in California for a long time, and as did I, and we're both in London now. So we decided to meet up in real life.
We even have some of the same network, it turns out. We have all sorts of friends of friends and things like that. So.
I guess when you're so, I guess it would make sense. But I thought we should meet up in person. So I went over to your office that one morning for a coffee. And this is the lead up to what we're going to talk about today, which is employment, what the Fed is getting wrong, and then finally, at the end, how we're going to make money from it. But we were talking, Martin. We were talking, talked about a lot of things, but we started talking about the economy, and you were kind of, I think I might have said something quite bullish about my outlook, but you were like, more thoughtful and going, yeah, there was a conundrum, and maybe you can explain the conundrum that you presented to me at the time.
Well, it was great, and I all credit to you. You actually found a really important piece of the puzzle, but we were talking about it, and I was trying to wrestle with this conundrum that all the indications I look at in the U.S. economy are telling me it's on fire. And that this whole localization-driven capex boom that started a decade ago and has just been steadily building, reindustrializing the U.S. has just gotten a shot of adrenaline like nothing else from the Trump tariff policy. So contrary to what most people think, this is actually really super bullish for U.S. growth. And the one thing that sort of contradicted that was, if you look at the non-farm payrolls, right? They started tailing off, and then there was these big revisions that show that, they were actually even slower than we thought. We stopped getting those through August, but in August, the 3-month moving average had dropped to like 30,000.
Yeah, there were even some negative months in there.
Yeah, there was one negative month in there. And so you say, well, okay, how is that consistent with the economy booming?
And Marvin, can I say one thing from your note? Didn't you? I think you worked at the Fed for a while, and wasn't there a kind of a rule of thumb that if you could only have one data point, right? This was the
So I mean, it cuts both ways, because one is that non-farm employment data generally are a lagging indicator. If you see them slowing, it's already started to happen. But the establishment survey, non-farm payrolls, is considered the best piece of reliable data that we have. So if you, exactly to your point, I was telling you that, the general rule was people would say, look, if I could only have one piece of data on a desert island.
This is the Fed, right?
Exactly. Everybody would have taken non-farm payrolls because it's such good quality data. Now, that said, there are some potential problems with it. And so, my question at the time was, well, look, it could be that the Fed is right because the Fed has been taking this as, well, this is a sign the economy is slowing, and they've decided to cut rates as well. They could be right that demand is slowing and all these other indicators I'm looking at are wrong. They could also, it could be that they're wrong, that this is actually what everyone predicted with the Trump administration, that you cut off immigration, which was responsible for a significant share of job growth, and you've actually shifted back the supply curve, which has a very different implication to it. And then the third implication I thought is that had to do something with a skills mismatch, that there, you had the wrong type of workers for what the economy was demanding. And you said, yeah, you know what it is, Marvin. You said, it's us. It's all the solopreneurs out there. So I went and finished my analysis, and lo and behold, it seems to be a combination of.
Marvin, I had to stop you because we're underappreciating the complexity of it. So yeah, I spouted off, I'm like, oh, I think there's a cultural change going on, that people are really more in a lot of reasons, starting their own businesses, having side hustles, diversifying their income, and realizing they need to, that you're not going to get rich. You're not going to have a nice house. You're not going to be able to put up a family with kids going to fancy colleges based on your 9 to 5.
Yeah.
That's been the realization. These wages just don't keep up. And the other thing is, I think on the technology side, I think there was a huge break with this in COVID, where work from home, you had all these things going. You had exploding inflation, exploding housing costs, and then you were able to work from home. Think about it before, 9 to 5. You're in an open plan office. You got your manager walking around, looking at your computer. Can't do anything, right? You just got to do work. Now you're home. You're like, oh, I can take a call from I'm doing an Airbnb. I can run over and let those guys in, or I can, work on a podcast, or I can be creator stuff. And and then the other, so now you have a lot more flexibility to start layering in these side hustles. And then the other thing was also with AI, and this is increasing, maybe not back in COVID, but increasingly, if you're deciding to start a job, this is like your business partner, and you know how they are. The AI is always thinks these ideas are great, and they do.
I've actually, you can put in instructions to your AI. I have mine. I've said, stop glazing me. Come on, just stop.
Well, I still like mine, but anyways, if you needed if you had some skill, you're a roofing, contractor or something, but you're worried about sales and marketing or legal advice, you have this business partner that helps you cross a lot of these challenges. And so one of the data points that I think is, just indicative of this is those startups, a new business formation post COVID. And there's, I think I said the Fed isn't there some distinction between, they say it's whether it has 1 to 2 employees or not, right? And most of them are these.
So it's the Census Bureau. So after our conversation, I went and dug into this, and the Census Bureau has a couple of different surveys. One is a relatively high frequency survey. They do it monthly, so you can get pretty up-to-date data. And it's business applications, and they then classify them as, so you can, the total number of business applications, and then as a subset of that, they say a segment of them are high propensity to employ, i.e. that they're going to be formed businesses that are going to have employees. Well, if you deduct that out, the leftover is basically saying these are businesses that are not going to hire employees. This is your all these side gigs you're talking about. So that's one piece. They have much better, much more detailed data on non-employee businesses, but that comes out with a significant lag and is only annual. So the last year for which we have it is 2023. But the really wonderful thing about that is they actually have revenue numbers for these things. So I mean, this is what was really amazing is, and we'll probably get through some of the analysis that I did, but to exactly your point, there is this massive surge in both of those after COVID. And the higher frequency one, I estimate that you're actually getting about 30 to 50,000 new solopreneurs per month that are not being counted by non-farm payrolls, because non-farm payrolls is the establishment survey. They survey businesses with employees. It does not include these. And so that's a big undercount. That's,
But Marvin, I want to go back. So I didn't say. So
yeah.
I laid this whole thing out. I think it's solopreneurs and everybody having other jobs, and that the consumer is actually stronger than you think. Hence, the economy's good because the jobs aren't catching all this other business.
Yes.
And you being the PhD economist, by the way, from UC San Diego, which is the, it turns out is renowned for its statistical econometrics work, right? So this, you were like, okay, Eric, that's nice. That's a great view that you have, but I have a little higher threshold and more rigor. And so you're like, oh, let me take this interesting theory, Eric. And so you went and did a kind of complex analysis to try to see, because the way, to see if this was possibly the case. And do you want to lay out the kind of, I think it's useful to know the challenge of figuring that out and how you went about it.
I should just say I wasn't quite so condescending. I don't think. I was like, that's a really good idea. I hadn't thought about that. And then I went immediately to go try and find these data you were talking about because I was so excited about it. So don't underplay yourself. But anyway, so basically, remember, if I add in your solopreneur theory, we basically have, 4 different theories for why non-farm payrolls were not showing. One is that the Fed is right, that it's a demand story, that the economy is just slowing and demand for labor is falling off. Number 2 is that it's an immigration, aging society, supply constraint problem, right? The Trump administration changed immigration policy. You're not getting as many immigrants. You already have most of the US labor force aging out. So you've just got a lot fewer workers to be able to hire. The second is, or third one is, it could be a skills mismatch, right? That we've got lots and lots of poets coming out of university and everybody wants to hire engineers, right? Well, that's not gonna be solved by interest rates or otherwise. That's a structural unemployment. And then there's this solopreneur, which is that we're miscounting. There's a whole bunch of jobs being created we didn't even know were being created. Okay, so those first 3 we can actually distinguish by basic economics. Anyone who's taken an Econ 1 class will remember sort of supply curve versus demand curve, right? And what happens when you shift one versus the other. So like if the demand curve is shifting back, you're going to get a fall in volume, but you're also going to get a fall in price, right? Whereas if it's the supply curve shifting back, you're going to get a fall in volume, but prices go up because there's not enough supply for people, right? Well, think about that in the labor market terms. Then what you should see happen is that if it's demand, both the number of employees being hired and wages wage growth should be falling. If it's supply, wage growth should actually be going up, and you get a fall in the number of employees. Well, guess what? If you look at this on an industry by industry basis, the industries with the biggest declines in employment or the slowest growth in employment are the ones that are having the biggest wage gains.
And that's such a counterintuitive thing, right? I mean, that's a great, really killer observation that this lack of volume, this lack of employment is actually associated with very, strong wage growth.
Yes. And there are other ways. So it's not just wages. I went through a whole bunch of different tests. You can look at other ones like, job openings should rise at the same time, right? And so you see, again, job openings going up in the same industries that you're seeing a decline in the number of hires. Well, again, why would that happen? You can't fill them. The other thing is that if it's such a really strong job market that, people can't find workers, then people feel a lot more confident quitting their job and doing other things or moving to another job. So what you see is this counterintuitive thing that a very strong job market will lead to a rise in what's called the quits rate. And again, look industry after industry, you see that the quits rate is going up in the industries that are seeing the greatest slowing in hiring. So it does seem very much like there's a supply aspect to this. But then, I was just starting to describe it earlier because you got me all excited about it, about these data. But, then I look at these census data, and sure enough, if you look at it, those higher frequency business applications, excluding the high propensity to employ, some of those are not creating, but some of them are, someone like not really creating a real business. It's just business applications that will never go lead on to revenue or something like that. But I can backfill it with that other data that I talked about, that's the business formations that actually have revenue, and sort of compare them. And I figure that you get about 30 to 50,000 per month that are not being counted by non-farm payrolls. So whatever you see non-farm payrolls, you should just be adding 30 to 50,000 to that number. So that's telling you right there that there's a mismeasurement problem. But then also, that that number is low because of supply, because of all those other tests, not demand. So all of this does fit together with a very positive picture. And I think the other thing that's really interesting, this is what I kind of wanted to get to with your point earlier about all the side gigs and people creating different sources of income and things like this. I think when you start talking about self-employment or this solopreneurship, a lot of people think the gig economy, and they're thinking the Uber driver or something like that. Now, never mind that a lot of these Uber drivers, to your point, are actually doing that as a side gig, making just additional money on top of what they're making elsewhere. But the fact is that the lower frequency data that I talked about that end in 2023, so we don't have the latest data on this, but we can see this massive acceleration since COVID. And you can also see a change in the structure of who these people are in the following sense, that if it was all a bunch of like Deliveroo and Uber drivers, you'd expect those revenue numbers to be really small. But what happens is post 2019, the categories that are seeing the biggest jumps in solopreneurs are that they give buckets for revenue. And so under $50,000 a year in revenue, those are all actually shrinking as a proportion of the total. The ones that are absolutely skyrocketing, so the $1 million to $2.5 million per year revenue bucket, this is not an Uber driver. That's grown by 2 times. That's twice as many now as there were in 2019. If you want $2.5 million to $5 million in revenue, that's 3 times what it was in 2019. So the point is, it's not just that we're undercounting the total number of jobs. We're actually undercounting people's income. Obviously I'm taking the very top end of the spectrum. But
Marvin, you're saying these are also low employee companies, but with this much revenue?
They're solo employee companies.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Which, by the way, did you hear? I don't remember the exact form in which he said it, but Sam Altman of OpenAI made this point. He said, we are going to see in the next decade the first billion-dollar person, not billion-dollar or trillion-dollar company. Because basically, to your point about how you can use all these automated turns to be so much more productive yourself, you can use these to make just a ton more money as a person. And so what's happening here is it seems that a lot of people in their sort of mid to later career are saying, look, for a lot of these lifestyle choices or otherwise, I want to leave and I want to go work for myself, and I can, because I can just set up a company, and my old company or all their clients or whomever are going to hire me directly, and I can do this all by myself.
Yes, I was going to get, is this some new structure, kind of like, yeah, where people, there's some big, senior guy at a company, and he's able to leave, create a consulting firm or some firm, and he's actually, is this changing the structure of how companies are basically, to some degree, going to a contracting relationship rather than an employee relationship?
Yes,
That
but
may be what it's.
okay, but there's some, in some sense, that's a great thing. So if you're one of us who has had this opportunity to do it, and I'm thankful that I'm one of those people. It's great, you get to structure your own life, whatever. But what does seem, and this gets to that whole skills mismatch. Like, remember I said that one of the explanations for the slowing of employment, and in fact, there has been a slight rise in the unemployment rate. It's not much, but it's a little bit. And if you look, it's concentrated. What I find is the biggest category of increase in unemployment, far outside of their share of the economy, is people with bachelor's degrees and above, and young people. And you see all these stories about the so-called job apocalypse for young people coming out of university right now. And I think the critical issue is, it is all about large language models and all these artificial intelligence tools that we've been given, because the critical element of those is knowing the right questions to ask, right? And if you've never worked before, if you don't have any experience, you don't know what to ask those things. So you can't be one of those productive solopreneurs. But if you're someone like this, like you or I, who are a seasoned professional who's been there for a long time, you know what are the right questions to ask. So it is creating a real tension here between the young, who are not being trained and are not being hired by these solopreneurs, and the solopreneurs who are leaving the companies. This is really changing the whole structure of work.
Oh, wow. Yes. And this is kind of that dark side of the low payroll number, is there is a piece of a group of the economy that's not,
yes,
skills don't fit, right? And this is what your last piece was about, like just a lot of the people coming out of college and how hard it is for them to get jobs.
Yeah, I mean, this one, I mean, this cuts across a lot of issues, and I think I'll probably start offending a bunch of people when I talk about it. But it's just a fact. Like, look, we are now having upwards of 50% of people go to university, and the fact is, we don't need a bunch of university graduates. We need a bunch of electricians. We need welders. We need people to do all these things that, as we reindustrialize the economy, we're doing that. And by the way, those jobs pay significantly more than most college graduate jobs. Like, if you have a liberal arts degree or a non-STEM degree, your average lifetime wage is somewhere in the sort of $55,000 to $65,000 range. If you're an electrician, your average lifetime wage is somewhere in the $65,000 to $85,000 range. Okay.
And then the double whammy is the $55,000 wage comes with a $250,000 student loan.
Exactly. And so I think this is one of the greatest crimes in Western society. And it's amazing how few people really identify this as the crime it is. We've got a lot of young people who are upset and think that somehow, somebody else is responsible for their problems. But and they're right, but they're pointing at the wrong place. They want to point at, it's greedy corporations, or it's the bad baby boomers taking all the houses, or whatever. No, what it is that all your bad baby boomer parents told you, every single one of you, that you should go to university and take out lots of debt to do this, because university is the best thing in the world for you. The fact is, most of those jobs don't actually give you any credible skills for the job market, other than enhanced literacy, which that's why ChatGPT is eviscerating those skills as job needs, because ChatGPT does that frankly better than they do.
So this is so the end, I think the end of your, just to go back to the end of your analysis was, yes, there seems to be statistical significance to say that solopreneurship is contributing to this, is a explanatory variable for why these payrolls are so low. But there are other things also going on, such as skills matches.
Yes.
But so you kind of came out of this going, so actually there is people creating companies. These companies are sometimes quite large. There's been a big pickup and increase in the number of these companies getting started. So we're not capturing this income that is now flowed. It's being counted. It used to be a job. Now it's a corporate profit. Yeah. And so, but this goes to back what you said at the beginning, that the potential is the Fed is making a mistake here because they're over keying off this labor market, this payroll number, when there's all these kind of shifts going on in income and structure. And that actually this is it, the economy, the top line numbers were actually correct, that there is, broad-based growth. CapEx is, retail sales are great, and this kind of fills in the missing pictures as to why people are doing better than you expected.
Yes. I mean, to me, that is sort of, I focus on macro markets, right? And, what's going on with rates, what's going on with currencies, all of those. And so for me, is the Fed in a policy error is the sort of critical question here. Because if they're wrong that, this slowing in payrolls is not about any sort of slowing in the economy, then what that means is that, one, earnings number, we should be very bullish on the economic outlook and earnings numbers and equities numerator, right? And we should also be very concerned about inflation, and that they're going to have to correct their mistake and raise rates significantly next year to offset their mistakes this year and last year. And I feel quite strongly that is the case. All this analysis points to me that they are making a clear error. If, on the other hand, I'm wrong and they're right, then great. Equities aren't going to be as great. You should be long fixed income. There's further gains to be made from duration, but nothing in my analysis is saying that that's correct.
Well, none of the data is showing that. The GDP numbers are great.
They're fantastic. They're off the charts. And what's really clear about that is there are all sorts of anecdotes out there about weakness in consumption. Now, the actual retail sales data tell you a different story. Retail sales, last numbers we got before the data shut off, retail sales were growing at an annualized 9% rate. That doesn't sound like they're very weak to me. And that's core retail sales, right? So excluding, volatile things. But even on a headline basis, they're still growing. But the real driver of this, where all the strength is coming from, is CapEx. Well, you don't go invest in a bunch of machines if interest rates are too high, right? This doesn't happen. So the very fact that the driver of the entire economy, CapEx, is, rocketing ahead, and we've got unbelievable announced investment plans by companies. I keep a running tally of this. $2.4 trillion year to date in announced investments in the United States. It's 75% of the total for the entire world. And 55% of that is manufacturing. Everybody wants to say it's just AI. No, it's not just AI. Massive investments taking place in manufacturing. All of this tells you interest rates are not restrictive. They are too low, if anything.
there's a company called Eaton, which is an industrial company, and they have a kind of a table, and it cuts across. They say the exact same thing. They're saying it's data centers, it's grid, it's defense, it's renewable energy, it's LNG export facilities. They're like, it is stacked across the board. They've never seen so many different parts of their business firing at the same time. And so just, kind of pulling this together, I mean, you're kind of skipping ahead to where the Fed has to correct, but I'm like, I think we're still probably going to get a Fed rate cut. I feel like they are throwing gas on the fire. And we have a very strong economy, CapEx through the roof, the labor market. I mean, I think one of the things you notice, if you see payrolls under, I think even if it's just 50,000, that's a tight labor market. You're saying we used to think that you needed payroll numbers of 200,000 to 300,000, but really when you start looking at these skills mismatch, the solopreneurs, it's tight. Even a 50,000 number is actually quite a hot number. So basically, the Fed is cutting rates into an inferno, and I think the economy is probably going to scream. The market's probably going to do well. And yes, the problem is, stage two is, do they have to, how does the bond market react to this? That's a big question. Everyone that's the pushback. People go, well, if that's all right, the bond market's going to ruin the party. The 10 years going to jack up, and that will kill the discount rate. I am less. I think one of the pushbacks, or I think one of the mitigating factors, is the front end will be lower. So, but yeah, and then you're like, well, we'll see. That's everyone's concern. But I mean, in the very beginning, I mean, just as to start, as the base cases, I think you've got a Fed possibly making big policy mistake, adding even more juice. And we also had rate cuts from last year, which often there's a delay to these things. There's a lagged effect. So we have prior rate cuts from last year feeding through, and then we're probably even getting a few more. And yet, so I think that we're off to the races. And I've been writing this. I think we have a global bull market, a boom.
Yeah.
So if you look at the IMF data, they've been raising their economic forecasts for the almost across every region of the world. I mean, not major, but the numbers have been creeping. You actually were talking about this. I think I was looking at the data because you went to DC and you were like, that was one of your big takeaways. They're kind of begrudgingly raising their growth across the board on everything.
Yeah, it was quite ridiculous. If you look at their reasoning, they say, but this has nothing to do with us getting it wrong on tariffs. Tariffs are still a terrible idea. But then they are literally raising their growth rates on everything, and they don't have any sensible explanation for it. And in fact, what's interesting is that the two places that they're raising their growth the most are the US and China. And so you're like, well, wait a second. This had nothing to do with you getting it wrong on tariffs, but you're raising the two countries that were most affected by tariffs in your prior forecasts. Yeah, it's.
Marvin, there's one last thing I wanted. So I think I think this is really helpful for everyone that that kind of explained this payroll anomaly that we started the conversation with. But you also, we were chatting earlier, and one of the things I brought up is that some people are kind of noticing weakness in certain like restaurant sales and certain parts of the consumer economy, and it kind of fits with the payroll number. They're like, oh, look, payrolls are low and restaurant sales are weak, and there's little things that kind of may back up a weak consumer story, even though the headline retail sales number is actually quite strong. But you were saying that actually maybe that's actually part of this industrialization trend, right? That there's actually a shift in how I thought that was a really interesting point.
So look, I think this is so fertile for any equity investor. So, this is a place that I would encourage someone like you, who's, much more fundamental single name person than I am, to really dig into, is that, when you're going to have any sort of economic transition, in terms of thinking about the overall growth, you need to think about the aggregate, but you also have to understand that there's tons of churn taking place under there. So, you've got what you might call Schumpeterian creative destruction, right? New businesses growing faster, but they're destroying other businesses in their wake. And the whole point of the Trump strategy, if you want to look at it as such, is to reorient the U.S. economy away from services and consumption and towards reindustrialization, right? And so that is going to mean that you're going to see more focus on goods production and less focus on services. So you're going to see lower tourism numbers. You're going to see lower restaurant sales. You're going to see all these things that in the last 30 to 40 years, everyone thought was a sign of a boom, not doing well. And yet that doesn't mean that the overall economy isn't booming. It's just booming elsewhere. And that's where you need to focus on. What is reindustrializing? To the point you raised earlier about Eaton and, just the broad swathe of different sectors that are picking up and taking off, and not look at some of those, sort of key consumer discretionary that people were looking at before and saying this was the sign of the economy, because that's not where it's going to be. The whole point of all of the shift in tariffs, in tax rates, in everything is to shift towards something else. And if you're looking at the old things, you're going to miss it.
Marvin, that is, I think, that is a great point, that we're in this shift. The way it's going to look and feel and who benefits is changing. It just, there's shifts in the job market and there's so many, but you're capturing in these overall numbers. That's where I was always like, well, the top numbers look really good. So, anyways, Marvin, I think that's a super useful conversation for us. And I want to just highlight your work at Thematic Markets and Simply Marvin. I think you have two different. Seriously, Marvin. Sorry.
Seriously, Marvin.
Oh, no, because you're always saying something that's contradictory to the consensus, which we love, by the way. And no, I think that's a very helpful. And I suggest everyone read your stuff. I mean, it's I think we'll be doing some more talking about more of your work in the future.
Likewise, and I'm really enjoying your stuff at YWR because, as I said, I'm not a fundamental equity guy, and you just you pull out all these great themes in there, and a lot of them give me ideas on stuff that I'm supposed to go be looking at in the broader economy. So it's a fantastic resource for me.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Marvin.
Thanks.